And let's sort of tick on the turnout side,
Sure.
what I'll often call the share
Sure.
side of it. Many of the folks who'll be taking these classes first have to be concerned about a primary.
Sure.
And their general election, if they get through the primary, might not even be particularly competitive.
Yep.
How do you, I can see how this is difficult but not impossible when it comes to a general election in terms of turnout. With primaries, a lot trickier, right? In terms of someone's propensity to vote in a particular primary, not to mention when we get to propensity to vote for a particular person.
Sure. Primaries, the tricky thing about primaries is that they're held differently, right? They're completely governed by the state and the party within the state. So at least with a general election, it's consistent, right? The election happens at the same time. It's consistently held.
There's a set of offices.
Right. There's a lot less of a risk of lack of data, right? This is a statistics course. I'm sure you guys have covered degrees of freedom and the importance of having a robust data set so that you can figure out and do robust feature selection and get as many features as possible in your model. Primary elections are a lot trickier in a lot of places, especially, to be perfectly candid, especially the last couple of years, because a lot of incumbents who aren't used to facing primary challenges, we're starting to see primary challenge, right? Like Joe Crowley in New York just got toppled. Who's 25-year congressman who just got toppled. Nobody,
but there was no previous data, right?
You don't have data on which to build a model because there's not a lot of primary history in an area. And so, it can be easy if it's a statewide where there's generally tends to be pretty competitive primaries. Virginia has been pretty competitive, at least on the Republican side in the last couple of years. It can be really challenging if you're think through a Texas Republican senator with a long incumbency. There's really no primary there to tell. What we have to do then is try and figure out what a good, right? This is all about identifying what a target variable for a model might be. Previous vote history is a really good one. Previous vote history in a like election is sort of the best case scenario. That's really easy to do in these general elections because we know who voted in 2014. That's easy to get. That's on the voter file, as we already talked about. In some of these primary states, you really have to triangulate. Can we look at how many people voted in, who are the really consistent voters in every election, right? Like certainly if there's a primary history, that's helpful, but we start getting beyond just, those voter files don't just have federal elections. A lot of them have municipal government elections and special elections. And so you start to build a more robust data set that says, okay, I'm not just interested in who the 404 general elections are. How many primaries have they voted in where they had that opportunity? Or just how many ballots have they cast, period, when they had an opportunity? And so you start to try and develop a picture of somebody who is a really consistent voter.
So that's going to be a really crucial step for our folks who are looking to run and probably run in a primary.
Sure.
You can't know what your win number is until you have some idea of how many people are going to vote in that primary.
Sure.
And I think that New York primary, it was like turnout is 30,000 people or something, incredibly low, right?
Yeah. And that's always the struggle when we work with clients in primaries. How can we come up with a reasonable guess? And my personal belief, and I think I360 in general, is of the opinion that a lot of people in politics, when it comes to analytics and data science, they go for false precision that really conveys a level of accuracy that's not real. And so what we're trying to do is, I'm not going to pretend like I'm going to tell you exactly how many people are going to show up. I'm going to come up with a couple of different ways to help you triangulate what we think turnout's roughly going to be. But for me, I think you said it very well, the turnout number is only important in as much as it helps you identify universes. Right? If you know how many people are going to vote, you know what your win number is. You start looking at how many of the people that are in your universe are likely voters. How far does that get you? And then you start to make value judgments about whether or not you think you can win the race based on the numbers through geo-TVing or getting out more people you think are likely to support you, or whether or not you need to get more into a persuasion, right? Like, is there a wedge issue in that particular primary that you can use, and can we identify voters that agree with you on that wedge issue that we think are likely to vote but aren't necessarily likely to vote for you? And so then we can start to figure out how to build this coalition between, here's the likely voters we think we have, here's the people that aren't likely to vote but we think will support you. We want to make sure to remind them and get them to the polls. And then here's this group of people that we think are likely to vote but don't think they're likely to support you. Either they're likely to support your competitor, or maybe they're in sort of like this persuadability, persuasion unknown universe, can we find wedge issues to drive them to you? We think they're going to show up. Can we get them to vote the right way when they get there?
Staying on primaries, how do you break people in primaries? So what I mean is, in a general election, and we talk about share and performance
Sure.
all the time, it's share of partisans and performance among partisans.
Sure.
But since in a primary, most everybody is a partisan, now certain states will have different rules
Yeah.
about who's allowed to
Sure.
vote, but generally, even if everyone's allowed to vote in a state primary, it's going to be Republicans or people identifying more as a Republican in the Republican primary, and people who are Democrats
Sure.
identifying more as Democrats. So I can't break people on Republican, Democrat, and Independent in a Republican primary.
Sure.
And so even though I've blabbered to the students about share and performance, what are you looking at for share? Is it gun owners or born-again Christians or ethnic groups?
Yeah.
How do you break them? I mean, I don't mean break them, but
Right.
how do you
figure out
segment
who's
them?
going to whom? Yeah, and
Or how do you even decide who you're going to
target?
do your share and performance calculations on?
So I think that really comes down to the individual race. You know, I mentioned wedge issues before. Are there key differences between candidates? And you see this a lot right now on both on the right and the left. But this idea between sort of the hardcore versus the party backed, right? Who are the traditional Republicans versus the Trump Republicans is a way that a lot of primary candidates are talking about right now, because you're starting to see sort of this populist appeal coming up more and more and more, challenging even long-term incumbents. They're getting shot from the right on this sort of populist appeal. And a great example of this is for the Senate race in Arizona. Right? You've got Martha McSally, who's a great Republican congresswoman. She's long resume, military service,
Right.
very well supported by the party infrastructure nationwide and in Arizona. But she still is dealing with Kelly Ward, who is more of a populist, more of the Trump-style appeal right to the people, maybe take some positions that aren't traditional Republican, rankle the party infrastructure a little bit. And so that's one great way, is if we can come up with some way to identify who are the Trump Republicans in my data set and who are the party Republicans in our data set. And then other than that, it really does come down to the individual election. Is this a situation where one of the candidates is more pro-gun than the other, right? And what are those wedge issues? What are those key differences between the candidates involved? And then we can use a number of different data points that we have in our system, along with some of the predictive models that I360's built, to try and start to figure out how you build that coalition. What do those breaks look like?